Okay, it's time for another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. I'm Michael James. I'm here in Chicago, and this would be number 133 since the beginning of the pandemic. We're recording it a little bit early, but it's for the week of December 31st, which is also the first week of the new year, which we hope is going to be really wonderful for everybody with lots of advances in the peace and justice world. Today, I'm really glad to bring on our sometimes co-host and our sometimes producer, Thom Clark. Good morning to you, Thom.
Good morning, Michael, and happy almost New Year.
Yeah, it's going to be good. We are a couple days early, but we're going to pretend it's New Year's Day and getting people ready for tonight. Here in Rogers Park, I'm sure there'll be a lot of activity on the street on Glenwood, just south of Morris, going all the way up to almost to Lunt. And of course, if you go over to Jarvis Square, Jarvis and Greenview, there's a number of establishments over there where people will be celebrating. Also, I know it's sold out, but I can't resist telling you that Grape Tooth will be at the Empty Bottle. That's Justin Vittori and Katie and Lake James are joining Clay Frankel and Chris Belloni with a Grape Tooth performance. Also, don't forget, Evanston First has a great bunch of activity up there just to our north. Thom, what do you got on the daughter's fiance?
What do I have about my daughter's fiance? Well, we're going to be celebrating her birthday this week with at RP Social, and hopefully they will have recovered enough to be able to do the end of the week and New Year's Eve celebrations. My lifelong partner is taking me to John Oliver at the Chicago Theater. We never go out on New Year's Eve anymore. We're a couple of old fogies, but I couldn't resist that. About 6 years ago, she surprised me with a concert for Aretha Franklin, which was great, except way too short, ended way before midnight. We ended up walking around looking at fireworks reflecting off the Aon building downtown. But this time, I think we'll be back home in the neighborhood. So I'm glad to know about those other things on Glenwood and Jarvis, because we can come back to that after John Oliver.
Well, you can always knock on my door.
One of the biggest overwhelming stories of the past year. We got rid of one autocrat, and then another one of even more destructive power comes into play. I admire what the Ukrainians have done against an alleged superpower, and it'll be interesting to see how, as I come out of winter, what the Ukrainians do with their next steps. But one of the things that kind of concerns me about all the attention and billions of dollars to prop up NATO's support of Ukraine that the U.S. is doing is there are about 30 nations at war in the world right now, and we barely hear about the rest of them. I'm particularly concerned about stuff going on in Africa that we never hear about. Our own city is taking refugees from all corners of the world because of conflicts, whether it's Afghan refugees or Syrian refugees who've been in camps in Jordan for 10 years and finally got here thanks to Refugee One and other local support groups. And then, of course, all the busloads of migrants coming up from Texas, that wonderful progressive governor down there. I just want to remind people that part of the reason for the whole border crisis, which I think we'll get into also in a moment, Michael, well, maybe I'll wait until you ask about that one, because there's lots of other stuff to talk about internationally and nationally. But I do wonder why there is so much focus on just Ukraine and not the other conflicts and what we're doing to try to resolve the other conflicts around the world, some of which are a direct result of U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah. You did mention a number of places where there are conflicts, and we know we're dealing with a lot of autocrats in the world. You wondered in our notes that go back and forth, you wondered, will that Biden's predecessor be indicted? Will he ever wear an orange jumpsuit? Since last week, there's certainly more oppression of Afghan women. They had not only forbidden women, college, girls to go to high school and to college, but now they have forbidden women from working for NGOs, non-governmental organizations, which really take up a lot of the burden of the severe suffering that's going on there. So that's something to keep your eyes on. And what about what you refer to him as Sleepy Joe Biden? What do you got to say about that, Thom?
Well, Sleepy Joe wasn't supposed to get anything done because he stumbled in speech patterns and couldn't think for himself and all that. But I think he has shown the rest of us how important it is to have a good leader who can pick good people to run government, which his predecessor couldn't do unless they were ideologically pure. And of course, being ideologically pure with the predecessor meant you were against government. So here we have a guy who's had a lifetime of public service, gave up one of his sons to the military, and has really surprised people, I think, with how much he's actually gotten done in a divided Congress and certainly a divided nation. I've listed some of the high points there, but certainly going back 2 years, a pandemic relief package that lifted child poverty to or lowered child poverty to the lowest rate we've ever seen in my lifetime. That, of course, is going to change in the new year with the child tax credit enhancements disappearing. I admire both the efforts of our mayor and governor to try some cash payment supplements to the really poor, because it's proven that cash can do a lot to bring people out of poverty. And they're not just spending it on chips. They actually are spending it on real food and rent and water. So we ought to be looking at those kind of transfer payments more and more, particularly when you see what people like Musk do with their billions.
About how the performance of Biden and getting a lot through, a couple things from the grand old party, which is what the Republicans like to call themselves sometimes. Newt Gingrich came out praising Biden on some stuff, and I don't know quite where that's coming from. And also the right-wing pundit, a guy named Mark Thiessen, he called the Republican performance in the last election an absolute disaster. And a searing indictment of the Republican Party, he lists the ranges of things that Biden did that he liked. Prevent crippling national rail strike. Well, we weren't so big on the way it came down. The first bipartisan gun legislation, extradition of terrorists charged with bombing of Pan Am Flight 103, sending B-52s to Australia to counter China, keeping Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard on the U.S. list of foreign terrorists, and using a drone to take out bin Laden's right-hand man and successor. Also protecting Taiwan. Now, these are not necessarily things that we would be happy about, all of them, but Biden seems to be pleasing people on a lot of fronts, and it leads to the Democratic Party getting much bolder. I've been watching, I watch a lot of news, and I did see on MSNBC, the governor of Minnesota, and he really came out. He's for expanding voter rights. And the whole thing is Democrats tend to be, it's all over the news about really going after the Republicans on fighting and restricting voting rights. And we're going to turn that around and promote more voting by more people.
I think that the saving democracy theme that Biden introduced in the last month of the campaign was more telling than the pundits realized. I think there are a lot of Americans who actually are concerned, given the predecessor in that office, with our democracy fading away. And part of that's the power of money. We had another signing out this week with the SCOTUS decision on the immigration regulation that's going to be put in place, showing once again that they believe in corporations more than people. And the pundit that you cited is pretty right wing, given the issues that he cited there that he's in favor of. That's the moderate former head of the Foreign Relations Committee who voted for Clarence Thomas to become Supreme Court Justice, Biden, showing his hand. But there's so many other things, from actually trying to do something about student loans, making a huge investment in climate change, ending the war in Afghanistan, notwithstanding the complaints about how it was ended. That's a war we shouldn't have gotten into. Thank you, Mr. Cheney and Bush. We are still paying for how they reacted poorly to 9/11, in my estimation. Have you gotten your state ID yet? I call it the Cheney star on your driver's license, because that's all from the effort to get a national ID system going. That's supposed to stop all the terrorists from coming over in the border. The list goes on and on. The debt relief, the historically unemployment after the pandemic. I mean, employers can't find enough people to get the work done, and I think it'll be interesting to see if we can actually not only get more voter rights to expand the franchise rather than shrink it, but whether we can maybe begin to grab back, even with a Republican-controlled Congress, some of the really amoral tax cuts given to the wealthy, while the rest of us working chumps still have to pay, I think, more than our fair share to keep the government going. So all in all, a pretty impressive couple of years. It's going to be a tough couple of years coming, except I think there's some more moderate Republicans who've been very quiet, who may be ready to step up and say it's time for a new page.
Yeah, I have a feeling that's the key thing to watch. How many Republicans will vote with Democrats on certain things because they're in democratically like districts that Biden won. We'll see how that shakes out. You mentioned the Supreme Court decision affecting that whatever it's called, number 42, that sends the migrants back to Mexico for health reasons. So, it's a controversial health order that allows for the expulsions of migrants at the border. It'll stay in place now through February. So it leaves El Paso, where we had a report from Steve Yellen right on the border a week or two ago, and we'll do that again. It leaves them in pretty rough shape. I don't know how the vote came down. It was 5-4. So we did get at least one. Was it Roberts that voted with the minority on this thing?
Well, we can get 4 votes now going forward on certain issues. There are 3 very conservative votes that we'll never get. So there are 2 in the middle there that we, should watch for. Read the arguments. The women in the court made some compelling arguments. And what I find ironic about this whole thing is that a president who did not believe there was a COVID crisis used that to prevent migrants from coming over the border and send them back.
Good connection.
And now his favorite governor in Florida, because I don't think it's DeSantis in Florida, is taking care of the problem by shipping migrants up to Chicago and DC and elsewhere, usually unannounced, usually without letting local officials prepare for it. Although Chicago has accommodated several hundred now that have arrived over the last couple of months.
Well, we're a welcoming town, even though there are a few people who don't necessarily welcome others. But by and large, we're living in a wonderful place, everybody, although it's been pretty cold. Let me just say about the one last thing on the border. A real good source of information on what's going on is an online newspaper called El Paso Matters.
Yeah.
And you can get that at elpasomatters.org. It's a good source. I met the publisher, and hopefully we're going to have him on. Let's switch over, Thom, we got another election in Chicago coming up on February, I think it's 28th. Yes, it is. And if there's any runoffs, it'll be April 4th. What do we got going on in that? What's at stake?
Since we don't have any pro sports teams winning anything, we might as well turn to politics because that is our true contact.
I got sports on here.
I just had to slip that one in there.
Oh, good.
Poor Hawks. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. Did they lose last night on Tuesday night?
They did. 3-0.
Well, they had broken the losing streak. Now they're starting another one. But we could switch to the sports report, but let's do Chicago politics. That election, you got anything to watch? Who's going to be the progressive who's competing with the other progressives? And what do you got?
Well, I just, with 10, maybe now 9 candidates, depending on another hearing, it might get down to 8. We have 8 candidates vying for Lori Lightsaber's position. Why anyone would want that job, I don't know anymore. But it is going to be a pretty new city council. Virtually every North Lakefront alderperson, plus a couple on the South Side Lakefront, are all retiring or moving on to other things. Our first term alderwoman is going to be the veteran North Side alderperson, along with your next guest, Andre Vasquez. I mean, who would think 1 year, one term incumbents would be in such powerful positions? But they both have done incredible work, and we'll talk to Andre a little bit later about what he's looking at. But I'm a little worried about whether the progressive forces will dilute their forces and give Lori a lane to slip through. I also wonder what impact bribe for a vote Willie Wilson might have. He endorsed Lori last time, but I'm guessing he's not this time since he decided to run. And that's a lot of church lady votes that may not go to Lori and may end up in Willie's camp, at least in the first round. And of course, that's the other thing we need to remember, shades of how Harold Washington got elected. We have so many candidates going up against the incumbent. It's actually not real clear at this moment, even if you add up the money, who's going to emerge as a major challenger and whether anyone can get 50+1, which I don't think is going to happen in the initial primary. So we're looking at a primary and a general election runoff amongst the top two vote getters. And I would guess one of those would be Lori, and I would hope the other one would be Chuy Garcia. Just to show.
Yeah, I hope that I'm going to say this again. I hope that people don't attack each other mercilessly because, Lori may not have done as much as we had hoped, but I think she's done some okay things, and it was a rough period of time to be the mayor. And I'm not sure why Chuy wants it. We go way back with Chuy. We're real fond of him. But he's a congressman with some clout, and he's been pretty influential in getting people elected in Illinois here. But he decided he wants to go for being a mayor. So we're going to probably try to have Lori and Chuy on the show in the not too far off. Let me see. One thing that I want to call people's attention to is the co-conspirators up in Michigan, 39-year-old fellow named Fox and another guy named Barry Croft. Both were convicted for trying to kidnap the Michigan Governor Whitmer, who is quite an impressive, progressive Democrat. Maybe I'm not quite sure if she's real progressive, but I'm glad that she didn't get kidnapped. And these people got put away for between 16 and 19 years. And Politico reports, this is our labor news, that the University of California workers have approved a contract agreement ending the longest higher education strike in U.S. history. And the United Auto Workers is involved in that election. And I do have a lot of information, but you can just look it up. And it's basically, there have been these, teaching assistant strikes going on all around the country. And this one turned out good. I think they got raises. There's different categories, but some of them got raises up to 80%.
Like so many other businesses, major universities have survived off the backs of adjuncts and research assistants who get paid a pittance, if anything, in exchange for credits. And it's about time that business model get upended. I'm someone who does believe in tenure, but you can't find a tenure contract amongst newly hired faculty virtually anywhere in the country anymore. But it doesn't mean that people who are teaching our kids shouldn't be getting a living wage. And many research assistants simply are not and have no benefits, and adjuncts aren't much better off. So it really is time for colleges and universities to relook at how they cover the labor costs of teaching people.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind a raise at the Paul.
It's a national battle that's been going on, but as you know, we have a couple of interesting local organizing campaigns. We get a lot of attention around starburnt workers having some success, though not many contracts yet. What I find more intriguing is the pressure on larger nonprofits like the Art Institute, the Field Museum, the Newberry Library, are all contending with union organizing campaigns right now. The one at the Art Institute has succeeded. The one at the Field Museum, it looks like may. The Newberry folks might actually be negotiating, but this is another new page for organized labor that goes beyond organizing public service employees, which had been kind of their last best hope for maintaining some kind of an organized base.
Okay, a couple more things before we wind up our opening banter. On the sports front, I'm not sure what to make of the Bulls. We already talked about the Hawks. The Bulls won 3 in a row. They looked like dynamite, and then they came home and just floundered. But also last Tuesday, and we're broadcasting this on Saturday the 31st, on Tuesday, Luka Doncic of the Mavericks, a 24-year-old Serb, got 60 points, 21 rebounds. That's something else. And for all you baseball fans who can't wait, let me just tell you that March 30th is the opening day. The Sox will be in Houston, and the Cubs will be at home. We, on the memoriam front, none of the people I know died this week, so I'm really glad about that. Although, it's been pretty regular, but our hearts do go out to the 30-plus people who died in the blizzard up in Buffalo. And that was a sad thing. And just in case you missed it, last week we had Marguerite Horberg on talking about not only the hot house, but about trips to Cuba. We also had Stella Brown on talking about Buddy, the store at the Cultural Center, and we had a jazz singer, Josie Falbo. But let me just say that on the Cuban front, following up on Marguerite, on this day, 12/31/1958, the Cuban dictator Batista told his cabinet that he was fleeing the country. Okay, so we're going to take a little short break. Hal, our engineer on today, is going to give us a little music, and we're going to come right back with the Alderman of the 44th, Andre Vasquez. Tom, stick around. We're back with more live from the Heartland for the week of December 31st, the first week of what's going to be a great new year, 2023. And we're really honored now to bring back a guy. We had him once when he was first running for office. Now he is the Alderman of Chicago's 40th Ward, the one, the only Andre Vasquez. Good morning to you, sir, or afternoon.
Hey, Mike. How's it going? Good afternoon, Michael. Thanks for having me on.
Drive slow.
That's right. Especially during this weather.
Well, I got Thom Clark here with me. We did the opening banner together, and he follows you probably even more than I do. But why don't you give us a little, since you're driving around, why don't you tell us a little about the 40th Ward?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 40th Ward, 58,000 neighbors. The neighborhoods are Lincoln Square, Andersonville, Bowmanville, Arcadia Terrace, West Ridge, Edgewater. So really a lot of the northeast side of the city. So there's a lot of very Chicago neighborhoods here that I really appreciate serving.
Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in a lot of different north side areas, right? So the earliest I remember was in Wicker Park. I always say before it was nice, quote unquote. So like Milwaukee, Damon area. Then we moved to North and Keeler, then like Addison, Elston, kind of Avondale. So every couple of years we would get priced out of a different neighborhood back in the 80s. So, a lot of the north side, I ended up here in 40th about I'd say 11 years ago. So I've been here since then.
So your story mirrors the development patterns. And of course, you're representing one of the hottest neighborhoods of all of the north side now. People think Lincoln Park, but Lincoln Square is, you can't touch the real estate there anymore.
Yeah.
How did your shovel brigade go this past brutal week? How many shovelers did you get out to help neighbors?
So I think we had between 20 and 30 out. And so we were able to cover like all of the seniors and disabled folks who needed help. And then I myself the neighbors donated and got us a snowblower. So I literally did about 13 different sidewalks myself for the neighbors. So, we took our time because it's kind of hard driving from one place to the other, but we got it done.
So did you happen across any more carjackings while you were out doing snow plowing?
No. None while we're out there. And I'll say none while we've been out knocking in the evenings either, right? So I think, clearly there's some incidents that we should all be concerned about, but we make sure neighbors know when incidents actually occur so they don't get too overblown as far as how people feel and are afraid of.
I thought you handled that really well. I don't know if you want to get into it anymore now that it's said and done, but you happen to be the guy in the scene when something was unfolding. And I know about this because it was 2 blocks from my son's school at Chappelle. And they were on lockdown, and he was upset because he was homesick that day, missed the lockdown, if you can believe that.
Yeah.
But you guys responded really well, really well.
No, thank you. I mean, later on, if we want to pursue journalism, I might jump into that because I was Johnny on the spot when it happened. So, we happened to be driving by, actually going from a neighbor dispute issue back to the office. I look at the side of the vehicle and I see a burning car in my periphery. We go and then find out that it had been a car chase where the car had been stolen, ran into a streets and sanitation truck, caught on fire, and then the individuals in the car had run off to hide in the garage, dumped their weapons before. So, we were on the scene for all of it. Ultimately, the officers came by and were able to apprehend the individuals who were in the car. Nobody got hurt. So we're just really grateful that occurred. But it was wild. I won't make light of it.
Let me go back to the politics stuff. Andre, what led you to politics, and what made you decide to run for alderman, and what was a pretty much a machine ward?
I think, for me, I always tell folks, like, I'm a product of the city, and that's like good, bad, and ugly. I think there's a lot of beautiful things in Chicago. I think there's a lot of challenges that I had to go through to get to where I'm at. And so when I think about, my wife and I met, we had our kids. And when I thought about everything my parents went through, my dad was a shoe repair guy. My mom worked at an envelope factory in the midnight shift. And I thought about the sacrifices they made as immigrants for me to have a solid foundation. It led to me really looking inwards towards myself and saying, well, what am I going to do for our kids? Because there's going to be a point where I'm not around. And so that led to me just community organizing in the area. And then as you start learning how your government works and you learn about the Chicago machine politics and Harold Washington and all those different things, it added up with a lot of my experiences of why I felt like I didn't get what others did have. And so it made me even more committed to organizing to make the change we want to see. So that led us to run against a guy who was here for 36 years in the seat, was a mayor's floor leader and the chair of finance by the time we ran against them. And they put up $1.5 million to try to keep us from really bringing change to the ward, but ultimately weren't successful. So my predecessor got a nice retirement before the pandemic. And that's what we inherited. And I'm glad to be here to serve the neighbors during that time.
Yeah, we had hoped when Harold won that he was going to be with the good guys, but he didn't. And we're glad that you took over that slot.
Thought that Patrick O'Connor was going to be with the good guys, but he wasn't.
Thanks for the fix. That's how you're like, Harold is the good guy.
Or the guy who was the last guy.
It sounded like you meant Harold wasn't a good guy.
No, Harold was the best ever.
Yeah.
Just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, no, prior to Pat over here was Ivan Rittenberg, who still lives in the 40th, I think.
Trey Parks.
Yeah. Well, you got a race coming up. Are there serious issues that people are debating in the ward? And what are the most important issues in your ward?
Yeah, I mean, I think across the city and in the 40th ward, people are worried about the same things, right? Number one on everybody's mind is public safety. And that means a lot of different things for different neighbors, right? I think seeing the crime incidents is a concern, but it's also like safety for our kids and our seniors literally crossing the streets. There's been a lot of vehicle collisions, and we've lost toddlers and seniors here in the ward, so that's a focus as well. I think overall, it's being able to access government, knowing that you feel safe in your home, right? No matter who you are, and that you're getting the services your tax dollars paid for. And so I think that's been the conversation we've had, and I think most of the conversations we have at the doors with neighbors are about that.
I have a quick suggestion about how a progressive alderman might help with the city's pension plan. As someone who recently got a red light ticket around Mather, a school zone I know about, and still got caught. I wonder if we shouldn't not put up another red light camera until Lakeshore Drive is patrolled. And for that matter, in our neighborhood, parts of Ridge, you could either A, make a killing and fund the pensions, or B, finally slow everybody down to the speed limit, which I think is actually the bigger problem that you're dealing with vehicular accidents and pedestrian stuff. People are just driving too fast.
Oh, I agree with you 1,000,000%. I think it's gotten worse post-COVID. People are just more urgent. There's more road rage issues. So, I mean, I kind of made it as a joke on the council floor, but I wasn't really kidding that if you were to put speed cameras on Lakeshore Drive, I don't even know that we'd have deficits at that point.
I think it'd be dealt with.
Yeah, and so we've also looked, and I talked to the mayor about this. It's like lowering the speed limit citywide to kind of get people to slow down, right? I think we're at a point where there's a change in how people commute, right? There's more cyclists on the road, more pedestrians. So we've got to create the infrastructure to support all of those and have a better public transportation. Also, why I dressed up like a ghost bus to try to make sure the CTA president came to a hearing. But I think if we improve all that, I think we end up with a better city. We end up in a better environment with less carbon in the air. So I think we're at a crucial point where we can make a pivot. And I think it's our time to start looking at it.
Hey, if we're going to put traffic lights on or control speed on Lakeshore Drive, on DuSable Lakeshore Drive, maybe we ought to not give out tickets on weekends at bus stops where no buses come, so that people could park. I mean, you'd open up a lot of space, and it would take away money from the city's coffers, I'm sure, but it would be a service to humanity.
But then I appreciate that. Then you give the bus drivers, or not the bus drivers, you have CTA an excuse of like, well, now we can't go there because people are parking there. So it's like,
yeah.
Sorry, the way I answer that question lets you know how I think about government. I literally think about the unintended consequences of everything now. But I think it's served us well for solutions here in Portland City.
Andre Vasquez, give us a little bit on the political race that you get, and then Thom probably has some questions about city council, the mayor's race, that sort of thing. But I'd like to know what you got. Much opposition over there?
We got right now 3 opponents. One of them, has tried to run for office before. We think he's registered as a Republican. So there's a lot there. Then we've got another neighbor by the name of Jane Lucius, who is like the block club, calls herself the block club president for our neighborhood, even though we haven't had meetings in the past number of years. And then there's a gentleman by the name of Christian Bloom, who I think is really focused on infrastructure as well. And like he seems to be for a lot of stuff that we're actually doing. So I think it's democracy. People get to run, they get to make their case. I think for us, it allows us to continue having the conversation with neighbors about the work we have done. And I think looking back at what we've done in the first term, there's a lot to talk about. And I think this is a chance to remind them.
You don't sound that nervous, and I'm not surprised, but I wonder if you're nervous as we look citywide at competing progressive candidates for mayor, giving the incumbent a lane to success.
I will say that thanks to my impression in this U.S. capitalist environment, I'm always anxious. So it keeps me sharp. I guess that's one way to look at it. I'd say as a mayoral, yeah, it's very challenging. Let's be frank about it. I think when I talk to neighbors, like I'm like, let me hear what the neighbors tell us. And I think the neighbors feel pretty confident on what they don't want, or they say that they're open to seeing who's out there. And I think when we talk about a progressive movement, it is a challenge. And I think people view it as like binary right now because Brandon and Chewy are both in. But I don't think that doesn't give credit to Cam Buckner or Sophia.
I wish he had made a bigger play than he has so far. He has some really good ideas. And for that matter, Sophia King has some really good ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think
hear from all of them.
The thing about me being a candidate and somebody who got elected is it's not, I appreciate now it's not just one thing. We can agree on the values. What's your platform and path to get there? What are the policy steps? What does your resume look like? What is your path to victory? How much money are you raising to make sure that the 3 million people that live in Chicago know your name and know who you are, right? How do you develop a field program so people know who you are across the city? All those skill sets don't necessarily coincide. You have to figure out who has the best mix of those to be able to make a case. And so I think Brandon clearly understands the values and ideals that we all want to achieve as a city. I think Chewy clearly, I would say, is like the most experienced out of all of the progressive candidates, right? He's been a city council member. He's been a Cook County commissioner. He's been at state government and also in Congress. So I think he knows how to work government in a way that is helpful.
Here's
I think,
yeah, it appears that he's pretty good at it.
Yeah, I mean, he's gotten stuff done, right? He's able to negotiate. So I think there's a lot there. you also got to look at who has the operation and the fundraising ability to take out an incumbent that's already kind of there. So I think there's a lot there for neighbors to look at. And so for me, as things progress and we have conversations with our neighbors and with people, that's kind of leading me to figure out, do I land anywhere before runoff, or am I just focused on what we're doing in 40, right? Because I think that's something I got to calculate too.
So how about filling us in on your predictions about the city council? Will the Progressive Caucus expand? What's your take on how it looks?
I don't know. I mean, you got 15 seats open. Again, all those different dynamics that you have to put together to run a campaign and be successful against incumbents as people coming in. I think what you are going to see, no matter what, is a more independent council. I think that if you look at, the Boss Daily, and then you look at Daily Jr., and then you look at Rahm, and then you look at Lightfoot, what you see is a trend of clearly weaker mayors, right? The jobs aren't there like they were back in the day. The amount of corporate capital isn't the same. So I think you end up in a situation where your council on the other end becomes less and less rubber stamp. What you saw in this term, I always tell people it's like a baby behind a driver's seat. Like, still doesn't know how to steer, still trying to figure out what it means to pass and power it has. But I think in this next term,
holds the steering wheel.
yeah. It's still trying to figure everything out, which is why it looks like a circus in council a lot. But I think as some of us, knock on wood, become more veteran, more seasoned, we organize some of the new folks, you get to a point where a council is more independent, which is good for the city.
Andre Vasquez, you're a real good interview, and clearly a progressive dude. We're glad to know you, and we wish you well and good fortune for not only you, your family, but your neighborhood, the ward, and the city. Long live the 40th ward. And if we have a softball game between the activists in the 49th and the 40th, I'm going to root for the 49th.
I'll try not to root for the 49ers, but you got so many over there. But thank you, Michael. Thank you, Tom. Shout out to Katie and everyone else. Like, you guys do amazing work, and I'm glad that we're able to have this conversation. It's good for our city, and I think regardless of the challenges, we're headed in a good direction. We just got to stick together and do it. And
we'll have you back. Drive carefully there, brother.
Definitely. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take a little short break, and we're going to be right back with Jeff Biggers, a fellow who has a keen eye on what's going on not only in Mexico and the United States, but in Italy. And we'll be right back with more Live from the Heartland here on the left end of your dial. Our New Year's Eve show, December 31st, for the first week of the new year, 2023. Just so you know, you can get this show not only on Saturday mornings on WLUW or streamed at WLUW.org, but you can get it anytime at youtube.com/heartlandmedia/videos. It's also on CAN TV and Spotify and Google Podcasts. And I'm really glad to be bringing on someone who was on the show probably a couple times over many years, the one, the only Jeff Biggers. Good morning to you, Jeff.
Good morning, Mike. How are you? Happy New Year.
I'm doing good, and thanks for joining us. Just so everybody knows, you're an American historian, a journalist, a playwright, an author, and you do monologues. And I remember one time we did an event over at the No Exit Cafe back when I was a businessman. And we did a bunch of stories and readings and stuff, and it was a lot of fun. And we did another thing together. You were doing a book signing somewhere, and you invited me to tag along. So Fill us in. You're down in Arizona. I think you lived there for a time. You've been around. You lived in Mexico. You lived in Southern Illinois. But since you're in Arizona, we need an update on what's going on in that state.
Yeah, I call it fear and loathing in the land of carpetbagging. I actually, we packed up the old 60 Chevy when I was a kid and left Illinois, and I came out and grew up in just outside Tucson. And then I actually went back in 2010, if you recall, when they had the SB 1070 bill, the Show Your Papers bill, and immigration became kind of a hot button issue in Arizona and the country. And so I went back and kind of covered that story for months, not actually almost a year, and put it into a book called State Out of the Union, The Final Showdown Over the American Dream in Arizona. And here I am, 12 years later, and we're dealing with the same issues. It truly is this land of carpetbaggers that every 10 or 20 years, we basically go through this same little episode where outsiders come in, kind of set up camp, kind of invoke some sort of patriot movement, issues over immigration as their key agenda, and then run for office. And of course, as I think a lot of your listeners know, just recently we had a woman named Carrie Lake who ran for governor here. She was more Trump than Trump. She ran on the whole conspiracy theory. She always had that kind of weird screen in the background, that Saturday Night Live dealt with when she did her Zooms. She was a former broadcaster. But the kicker is she's from Iowa, and here she is as a total carpetbagger who comes out to Arizona and then once again, a few years later, runs for governor. And her main issue is always about this hyperbolic issue about immigration and the border and whatnot. And she lost. And I think that's what we're dealing with is the fallout is she's trying to pull a Trump out here and go to the courts and deny it and come up with all sorts of conspiracy theories about why she lost. But the bottom line is she lost by 17,000 votes. And once again, as the episodes have shown us every 10 to 20 years, there is a resistance, there is a democratic movement, and truth and justice and democracy has prevailed here in Arizona. And I think that's the good news I can share with you as we go into 2023.
Well, is Arizona the beneficiary of a lot of transplants? It's moved to sort of Democrat. You got two Democratic, one Democrat and one, I don't know. We could talk about the senator from there. Right. But I'm just wondering about how many people from the North leaving Illinois, leaving New York, they go to North Carolina, they go to Arizona. It seems to shift the politics in a progressive direction, or a little bit, at least more democratic direction. Is that the case in Arizona, that there are people, what's moving the politics a little bit more democratic than it's been?
Well, and once again, it cycles back because it has been democratic, then it goes right wing, then it's democratic, and then right wing. If you look at this state, it's really a good example of transiency. Every few years, nearly a quarter to a third of the state population shifts. So people move in from California or move in from the Midwest or elsewhere in the South. And then after a few years, they move out, and so that lack of stability, that lack of transiency often provides an upheaval in politics because it's largely a demographic that's not rooted, that's part of these suburbia communities who ultimately vote for whoever is in vogue at the time and then move on. On the other hand, there's a sizable minority, if not majority, of the state that has been here for centuries, and I think we often forget about the fact that it's not like the large part of the Mexican-American population, Latinos, Chicanos, whatever term we use, it's not like they crossed the border crossed them. If we go all the way back to the mid-19th century during the Mexican-American War, and then eventually the Gadsden Purchase, when we basically grabbed this part of Arizona and called it Arizona. And so that's a long, entrenched, very solid community that has always been here and always will be here, that finally is growing and the demographics are changing, and we're beginning to see the results, as you say.
A lot of the United States, particularly in the Southwest, was taken from Mexico, California, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, probably Texas too. I'm reading a book now. I just started. I got it for Christmas, called Bad Mexicans, and it's about the Magonistas, who there were Mexicans were getting screwed in Mexico by Diaz, who was the president and was really friendly with the American imperialists. And when they went to Texas, or in the Texas part, they were getting oppressed there. So there was a rebellion led by this guy Magon, and it was pretty formidable back then. So you do have some tradition among the Mexican community there of being on the right side of things or the left side of things.
And I would even say they've always been. We go all the way back to the 1860s, when still there's this kind of nebulous attitude. We're not quite a territory yet, and so we have the split of our nation between the Confederacy and the North. And this is a great story because Ochoa, by 1875, became mayor of Tucson, and he founded public education. And so here we are in 2023, and we finally have elected the second Latino or Latina. Her name is Regina Romero, who is now the mayor of Tucson. And she's the first mayor of Mexican descent, Mexican ancestry, since Ochoa stood up to the Confederates in 1860. So it's amazing the long time it has taken to have this kind of process. In the meantime, over that 120 years, it's just been one battle after another. Remember, Mike, Arizona came into the Union with one of the most progressive constitutions in the country. You had people like from Illinois, William Jennings Bryan, who came out there to campaign. Mother Jones campaigned on behalf of the first governor. His name was Governor Hunt. He was a poor kid who eventually worked his way up in the copper fields. And we entered as a pro-labor state. But the problem, even then in 1912, was this division between incoming outsiders from the Midwest and the South, and the people who resided here, the Mexicans and eventually the Mexican Americans. And that battle is something we just continually fight every 10 years.
Well, there's two more things I want to ask you about that I know we were going to talk about the fascist government in Italy, but I think we're going to have you on again and we'll do that one. But I want to know about what's happening on the border. We hear a lot about El Paso, but there must be points of entry in Arizona too. And what kind of crisis have you observed? Are you there living there now, or are you just visiting?
I'm just visiting.
Yeah.
The border is an issue if we view it as a humanitarian and environmental crisis. Certainly there's the issue of migration, as there is around the world. Last year, globally, more than 65 million people were displaced. 65 million people displaced throughout Africa, throughout Asia, and in Europe, and of course throughout the Americas. And so the people who are coming across the border now, of course, are not from Mexico, but these are refugees and basically climate refugees and migrants coming up from places like Honduras and Guatemala, and of course places coming in like Venezuela and other countries. The big crisis that we read about in the news this week, of course, is that under Trump with COVID, they had what was called Title 42, which allowed them to set up and send back people asking for asylum or some sort of immigration protection. They're able to send them back due to the quarantines over COVID, that if you come from a country where there are outbreaks or whatnot, you're not allowed to enter. And that, of course, has created a lot of confusion and a lot of problems. And that Title 42 is on a countdown to expire. And there's been all sorts of conflict and controversy over that. I mean, the truth is, Mike, whether you're in Italy, where the fascist leader, Giorgia Meloni, just won, only running on the issue of anti-immigration, or if you're in Arizona, where Kari Lake tried to run for governor, only on the issue of anti-immigration, the truth is we are in a global shift right now with climate migration, with all sorts of disasters coming home. And so it's not a unique issue of any country around the world, and nor is it an issue that we have to blow up as some sort of controversy that's new. It's an issue that we need to roll up our sleeves and come to grips with and realize as a nation and as a world how we're going to deal with the reality of displacement today as we go into 2023 in the future.
Jeff Biggers, you mentioned the environment, and while we're having lots of snow and rain and stuff in certain sectors, what's the situation environmentally there in Arizona? I know you did an article, I think it was New York Times, about windmills in Iowa. Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming you're observant of windmills everywhere you go. What do you got to tell us about environmental conditions in Arizona?
Right. It's just a pleasure for me to go around the city of Tucson, for example, and see in so many places, all the parking lots are basically solar panels. They've set up these ramadas with solar panels on top. And you see that throughout the city. You see that at all the schools and all the government buildings. My family here in Tucson just received a note from the local utility company that they'll be required to shift to solar if they apply for this program, and it'll be free. So you see finally a movement, and largely that is because you now have democratic forces that are moving quickly with a Democratic mayor in Tucson who's quite progressive and environmentally oriented. Once again, Mayor Romero. On the other hand, the issue here, Mike, is water. And here's a good way almost to wrap this up is that Tucson is a ancient O'odham word from our indigenous tribe here. And Phoenix, of course, is named after the fact that there are all these ruins there, and from the ruins of those canals, they created the city of Phoenix. But there was an ancient civilization here 1,000 years ago. It grew, it became so big, they had canals, they had the largest water works outside of anywhere in the American system. And then it collapsed around the 1200s because it just ultimately wasn't sustainable. And now we've done that same thing where virtually all of Arizona relies on a canal called the CAP, one of the biggest government programs that was pushed through, of course, in Congress after the war, that brings the water all the way down from the Colorado and the Colorado River across the state. And that's drying up. You know, ultimately, when that water arrives in Mexico, where they were supposed to have a share, it's just salt and sediment. And so the water issue with all this issue of climate change is going to become the issue. In fact, if we want to talk about migration and the transiency and the lack of rootedness, that's ultimately what's going to be, should be the discussion we're having right now.
Well, Jeff, this is really good. And I know we were going to talk about the new Prime Minister of Italy and her fascist connections, but I'm going to save that for another time. I really appreciate you coming on. I want to share with everyone that you have some really wonderful books out. The United States of Appalachia in the Sierra Madre, which is a memoir. You lived down there in Baja with the Yaqui Indians, so I think it was.
Yep.
Tarahumara, I'm sorry. Yep. And then you did The Reckoning at Eagle Creek, The Secret Legacy of Coal in the Heartland. You're a prolific guy. You're inspirational to me. And I might send you some things I've been writing for you to read and edit for me.
That would be a pleasure. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Mike.
Are you still working on screenplays with a friend of ours?
We certainly are. And it's just one of the most exciting things. I'll always be indebted to you for introducing us. But I'm going to talk to you soon because I have a book coming out in May. It's about a land that totally has stolen my heart. It's called Sardinia. It's the island off of Italy, just north of Sicily. And it, to me, is really one of the most unique places. They've had breakthrough archaeological discoveries to realize that this, in fact, was the cradle of the Bronze Age. And of course, this little tiny island of 1.5 million people have really been the great fountain of culture from people like our beloved Antonio Gramsci, who, of course, informed us on politics, to Nobel laureates, to writers, to musicians, to so many exciting things. So our next talk will not be so much about politics, but the great cultural history of Sardinia, which is once again on the front lines of so much change there in the Mediterranean. So can't wait.
I'm looking to getting educated on all that. And I look forward to seeing you. I was thinking whether in Iowa, I don't know how long you're in Arizona, but I'm going to be getting out of town sooner or later because it's cold up here. Well, not today, but it has been. Jeff Biggers, you're a hell of a guy. I'm really glad you're my friend. And I want to thank you for coming on.
Great, Mike. Great to see you.
Who's out there and been listening to the show or watching it, we wish you well in the new year. We encourage you to do a lot of good because, you know, that's what's happening. Next week, I'm going to have another old pal, Ivan Handler. He's going to talk about the critical importance of biodiversity and why it's being ignored in favor of climate change. So let's see what will happen with that one. And we got a bunch of former activists from way back in the 60s coming on over time from my pals in Students for Democratic Society. And we always want to thank the people at WLUW, our home base, as well as Katie Hogan, Lynn Orman Weiss, Thom Clark, and Hal James, as well as our guests. We're getting this show together every week. Jeff Biggers, thanks for joining us. You and I keep doing good in the world because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that Hal does, that all our friends and family do. All power to the people.
Are you doing the best you can?